My husband insisted I shouldn't attend his company's gala, saying it was for employees only. Before leaving in his best Tom Ford suit, he told me not to wait up for him. Then his secretary posted a photo. In the background, he was with his ex. 1 hour later, I walked into the ballroom alongside the entire company board, and I made sure his night was unforgettable. My name is Alexandra Pierce. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 3 years, my biggest success has been a secret from my own husband. I live in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the bay, a monument to a life Logan, my husband, thinks he built. But the truth is, I've built my life behind a curtain. To him, I'm a quiet freelance consultant who happens to be good with money, good enough to keep our lives comfortable, our mortgage paid, and our wine rack stocked without him ever asking too many questions. He believes his title, Vice President of Partnerships at Nexara Dynamics, is the engine of our success, the reason we can afford this view of the Golden Gate Bridge turning to rust-colored gold in the sunset. He has no idea that Nexara is mine. I founded it with my own capital, built on code I wrote in the late hours in this very apartment, fueled by coffee and a refusal to fail. I own 61% of the company through a family trust, a complex legal structure my attorney designed for one purpose: to keep my name off the masthead. My father always said, "A smart woman builds assets, not a reputation." He and my mom raised me to be the power, not the face of it. They believed a woman's name in the headlines was a liability, an invitation for scrutiny they couldn't control. So I learned to move in the shadows, to be the unseen hand guiding the ship. Logan sees my work as a hobby, a collection of small projects that keep me busy while he's out there changing the world. He has no idea that when he submits his quarterly budget for approval, I'm the one who signs off on it. The jolt that shook my carefully constructed world came on a Tuesday evening. Logan burst through the front door, waving his phone like a trophy from a war he'd just won. The sound of his keys hitting the marble entryway table echoed in the cavernous space. "We're a frontrunner, Alex, for the Bay Area Innovation Honors." He was electric, pacing the floor, his reflection streaking across the polished stone. He was already picturing himself on that stage, the spotlight warming his face, the applause a symphony for his ego. I felt a flash of genuine pride, not for him, but for my team, the engineers, the designers, the people who actually built the technology he was so eager to take credit for. He pulled a bottle of champagne from the fridge, the expensive kind we save for special occasions. The cork popped with a satisfying thud, and he poured 2 glasses, the bubbles fizzing and climbing the delicate flutes. But he handed one to me like I was a spectator, a supportive fan on the sidelines of his victory. "You won't believe the people who will be there," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Every major player in the valley." "This is huge." I smiled, a genuine, uncomplicated smile, and asked the question that felt most natural. "What should I wear?" I was already picturing the midnight blue gown I'd bookmarked on a designer's website weeks ago, imagining the feel of the silk against my skin. He stopped, the triumphant smile tightening at the edges, losing its warmth. "Oh," he said, the single word a small, cold stone dropped into a quiet pool. It's really an employees-only thing, babe, a networking night." "You'd be bored." He said it so casually, as if he were telling me I wouldn't enjoy a monster truck rally. It was a dismissal so smooth, so practiced, it almost slid right past me. But it didn't. It snagged on something deep inside. Then he added the final sting, the words that would echo in my head for days. "Besides, you wouldn't really fit in with that power crowd." His words hung in the air, colder than the champagne in my hand. He didn't see me as part of his world because he had no idea I had built it, brick by digital brick. It was a world he was merely visiting, a guest with a fancy title and a corner office. The lie I had lived for 3 years suddenly felt less like a smart strategy and more like a self-inflicted wound. He then mentioned, with the same infuriating casualness, that he was taking someone else to keep up appearances. "Sabrina Vaughn," he said, the name rolling off his tongue a little too smoothly. "An old friend from grad school," he added, as if that explained everything. She's a consultant now, super sharp. It's good for the company to have her there." He turned to the counter, picked up his bottle of cologne and sprayed it on his neck. It was Tom Ford, a scent I'd bought him for our last anniversary, a scent that had once smelled like romance and intimacy. Now it was suddenly cloying, dishonest. It was becoming the scent of my betrayal. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, I just nodded, letting the silence be my answer. My stillness has always been my shield, but I was beginning to realize it was often mistaken for agreement. That night, I lay awake long after his breathing had deepened into a steady rhythm beside me. I replayed his excuse over and over. "You wouldn't fit in." It wasn't just a rejection, it was an erasure. He was editing me out of my own success story, a story he didn't even know I'd written. In the cool, dark quiet of my bedroom, a new goal took shape, hardening from a vague hurt into a sharp, clear objective. My goal was no longer just to attend the gala. It was to reclaim the truth of who I am. The obstacle was the man sleeping beside me, the man who believed my greatest contribution to his life was staying quietly, conveniently out of it. The next morning, I was going through the hollow routine of scrolling through my social media feed, a mindless habit to fill the empty space before the day truly began. My thumb stopped on a photo posted by one of the junior marketing assistants at Nexara. The caption was bubbly and full of exclamation points, so excited for the pre-gala mixer. Great minds coming together. And there, in the center of the frame, under the dim, stylish lighting of a downtown bar, were Logan and Sabrina. They were standing close. Too close. His hand was resting on the small of her back, a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Her smile wasn't just sharp, as he'd described, it was predatory. She was looking up at him not like a colleague, but like he was the prize at the end of a long hunt. He was leaning in, whispering something in her ear, his expression unguarded, animated in a way it hadn't been with me for months. The camera had caught a moment that wasn't meant for public consumption, a moment that told a story far different from the one he had sold me. The lie wasn't just that I wouldn't fit in. The lie was that Sabrina was just a friend. This wasn't a networking event. It was a date. And he was using my company's success, the award my team had earned, as the backdrop to stage it. The dull ache of hurt from the night before crystallized into cold, hard anger. My first tactic, silent, wounded acceptance, was no longer an option. This image was a declaration of war. I didn't hesitate. I closed the app and pulled up the number for Marjorie Flynn, the chair of Nexara's board. Marjorie was more than a board member, she was a mentor, a titan of the industry who had taken me under her wing years ago. She was one of the few people on earth who knew I was the company's majority owner. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to be steady, even. I asked her about the gala preparations, keeping the conversation light before casually mentioning Logan's choice of a +1. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a beat of silence, but it was enough. "Alexandra," Marjorie said, her voice dropping a register, "there's something you should know. Logan's been pushing something at the board level. Something big." She told me about a proposed deal he was championing with StraightestMind, our biggest and most ruthless rival. Logan was framing it as a strategic partnership, a brilliant move to generate a massive press hit right before the awards ceremony. But Marjorie explained the deal was a Trojan horse. StraightestMind didn't want a partner, they wanted access. They wanted to get their hands on our flagship tool, the very core of our technology. They wanted a peek at the code I had spent 5 years of my life nurturing from a simple concept into a market-leading product. This was the first I was hearing of it. As the owner, a deal of this magnitude should have come to me first. Logan had deliberately gone around me, treating me like I was irrelevant. Marjorie's voice grew grim as she continued. To make the deal look attractive to them, the pitch involves streamlining operations. You know what that's corporate speak for? Layoffs. My stomach twisted. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She told me the number being floated was 140 employees, 140 people, good people. The engineers who stayed late to fix bugs, the support staff who patiently walked our customers through problems, the quiet, brilliant minds who were the real heart of the company. My breath caught in my throat. He was willing to sacrifice 140 livelihoods, 140 families, all to make a splashy announcement and impress a rival, all to feed his own ravenous ego. This wasn't just about him cheating on me with his ex-girlfriend. He was gutting my company from the inside out. He was selling its future for a round of applause and a moment in the spotlight. My options, which had seemed complicated just moments before, suddenly narrowed into a single, sharp point. This was no longer about my marriage or my pride. It was about my responsibility to the people who trusted me with their careers, people who didn't even know my name. "Thank you for your honesty, Marjorie," I said, my voice now devoid of any emotion except for a cold resolve. "I'll handle it." The clash was no longer just with my unfaithful husband, it was with the vice president of my company who was actively trying to destroy it. I don't waste time with tears. Anger for me is a clarifying force. It burns away the fog of hurt and leaves behind a clear path. I scheduled an immediate, off-the-books meeting. My first call was to Oliver Crane, my personal attorney. Oliver was the architect of my family trust, a silver-haired shark who knew every loophole in corporate law because he'd written half of them. My second call was to Daniel King, Nexara's chief financial officer. Daniel was a quiet, intense man, ex-military, whose loyalty was absolute. He viewed the company's financials not as a spreadsheet but as a battlefield to be defended at all costs. We didn't meet at Nexara's gleaming headquarters with its glass walls and catered lunches. We met in a discreet rented office suite downtown, the kind with anonymous beige walls and no digital trail. I laid out the entire situation on the polished mahogany table. Logan's affair with Sabrina, the secret straightest mind deal he was pushing, the proposed layoffs of 140 people. Oliver's face was stone, giving nothing away. Daniel's knuckles were white as he gripped the pen in his hand, his jaw tight. I asked Daniel to pull all of Logan's corporate expenses and communications for the last 6 months. Every email, every text from a company phone, every receipt. I asked Oliver to review Logan's employment contract and, more importantly, our prenuptial agreement, looking for any and all clauses that defined a breach. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a counterintelligence operation. I thought I was just dealing with a snake in my house. I was beginning to realize he'd been breeding them in my company, letting them nest in the very foundations of what I had built. Daniel called me 4 hours later. His voice was flat. "You're not going to like this." He'd found encrypted emails between Logan and Sabrina sent from his work account. Using a backdoor he'd built into our servers for security audits, he had decrypted one. Logan had attached a confidential internal pitch deck, a document detailing our fourth-quarter growth strategy, including product features that hadn't even been announced to our own team yet. The subject line of the email was sickeningly casual. "A little homework for you, let's get you prepped to wow them." He wasn't just bringing her to the gala for show. He was feeding her my company's most sensitive data, giving her an inside track. Sabrina wasn't just a plus one, she was a co-conspirator, using my company's secrets to bolster her own consulting career and make herself look indispensable. Daniel wasn't finished. He'd also flagged the expense reports. There were dozens of them. Lavish dinners at the city's most expensive restaurants with Sabrina, all listed as client meetings. There was a hotel booking for a weekend in Napa, filed under recruitment off-site. He was funding his affair with my money, billing his romantic getaways to the company I had founded. The betrayal, which had been a storm of emotion, now had a price tag. It had a dollar amount attached to it, a clear, quantifiable line item of his deceit. As I was trying to process the sheer audacity of the financial betrayal, my laptop pinged with a new email. The sender's name was one I hadn't seen in years. Gia Morales, a brilliant young engineering intern candidate I had interviewed and personally championed 2 years ago. Gia had been my top pick, a diamond in the rough with a fierce intellect and a passion for coding that was palpable. But Logan had vetoed her hiring. His official reason, sent in a curt memo, was that she was not a culture fit. He had told me in person that she seemed too intense and didn't have the pedigree for a top-tier tech firm. Gia's email was polite and professional. She was writing to congratulate Nexara on the award nomination and mentioned that she was now working at a small but innovative startup across the bay. Her email was a lightning bolt. It illuminated a pattern I had been too blind to see. Logan's gatekeeping wasn't about culture fit. It was about control. He didn't want brilliant, intense women like Gia in the company. He wanted people who wouldn't challenge him, people he could easily manage and intimidate. The problem was so much wider than I had imagined. He had been quietly shaping my company in his own insecure image, weeding out the very people, the passionate, the intense, the brilliant, who could have made it stronger. He didn't just sideline me, he sidelined anyone who reminded him, even implicitly, that he wasn't the smartest person in the room. My mind was racing, connecting dots that had been floating separately for months, for years. I called Daniel back, my voice sharp. Look deeper into the straightest mind deal. Who benefits personally? Follow the money. He dug into the formal proposal Logan had quietly submitted to a subcommittee of the board, the one he had hoped to keep from me. An hour later, Daniel had the answer. Buried deep in the fine print of the deal, couched in pages of dense legal language, was a finder's fee and a synergy bonus structure. A 7-figure payout was designated for the external consultant who facilitated the partnership. The consultant was unnamed, but there was no doubt it was Sabrina. And an even bigger bonus, along with a new, powerful title, Chief Strategy Officer of the merged entity, would go to Logan. This was never about impressing a rival or a bold strategic move. It was a cash-out. Their plan was to sell my company for parts, walk away with millions of dollars, and leave the wreckage behind for someone else to clean up. They weren't just going to sacrifice 140 jobs. They were going to do it for personal profit, a golden parachute woven from the careers of my employees. The stakes were no longer just about saving my company. It was about stopping a heist, a brazen, high-stakes robbery planned by my own husband. My quiet, behind-the-scenes approach had failed spectacularly. It had enabled this. It was time to prepare for a public execution. The call from Oliver Crane came late that night. His voice was clipped, devoid of emotion. I have it, the hard proof. He had a source, a junior lawyer at the firm representing Stratus Mind. The young lawyer, it turned out, had a conscience and was deeply uncomfortable with the ethics of the deal his firm was pushing. He had reached out to Oliver, a man he respected by reputation. He had forwarded an email chain. The entire unvarnished plan, spelled out in black and white between Logan, Sabrina, and Stratus Mind's chief executive officer. The emails were sickening. They referred to Nexara's board, my board, as legacy players who could be managed with the right combination of pressure and promises. They openly mocked our company's ethics charter, the very document I had written to ensure we built technology responsibly, calling it sentimental garbage that was holding back profitability. But the line that felt like a physical blow, the one that stole the air from my lungs, was written by Logan himself. My wife is the silent money, but she's completely hands-off. She won't even know what happened until the papers are signed. She trusts my judgment implicitly. He saw my trust not as a gift, but as a vulnerability. A loophole to be exploited. He was bragging to his co-conspirators about his ability to deceive me, casting me as the clueless, trusting wife. This was the smoking gun. This was the final, hard proof that I wasn't just being paranoid or insecure. I was being outmaneuvered, condescended to, and laughed at. There was no coming back from this. There would be no quiet conversation, no negotiated exit. This was total war. I was sitting in the sterile quiet of the rented office, the printouts of the emails spread across the table like evidence from a crime scene. For a fleeting moment, I pictured confronting him at home. A screaming match in our beautiful penthouse, throwing his expensive, custom-made suits out the window onto the street below, the raw, messy, emotional drama he probably expected. But that's what he would want. A reaction that fit his narrative of me, the sentimental wife prone to hysterics. That would give him power. It would allow him to frame me as unhinged, to paint me as the problem. I realized the only way to win was to refuse to play his game. I had to operate on a level he couldn't even comprehend. In that moment, I burned the last bridge to my old life. The idea of saving my marriage, of finding some kind of compromise, turned to ash and blew away. I picked up my phone and called Oliver. "He thinks I'm the silent money," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Fine. The money is about to get very, very loud." My new approach was set. I would not confront him as his wife, I would confront him as his boss, and I would do it on the biggest, most public stage he could possibly imagine. Just as my resolve hardened, Marjorie Flynn called again, her voice tight with urgency. The timeline was collapsing. "Logan is trying to force an emergency board vote on the Stratus Mine deal," she said, her words clipped. "He's scheduling it for the day after the gala. He's telling everyone he expects to have the award in hand and he wants to leverage the momentum." He wasn't just planning a party, he was planning a coup. The gala was the launch pad. The award was the justification. I didn't have weeks to plan my counterattack. I had less than 48 hours. Everything had to be perfectly coordinated. Everything had to detonate on gala night. Failure wasn't an option. Failure meant I would lose my company, the layoffs would happen. He and Sabrina would walk away rich, celebrated, and untouchable. The pressure was immense, but it was clarifying. There was only one path forward, and it was through the heart of the storm. I pivoted instantly from investigation to mobilization. The time for gathering intelligence was over. It was time to deploy assets. I instructed Oliver to draft the termination papers for Logan Price and a cease and desist letter for Sabrina Vaughn. The reason for termination was simple, clean, and brutal. Breach of contract and the unauthorized disclosure of confidential company information. No emotion, just facts. I told Daniel to work with human resources to calculate Logan's final paycheck down to the last cent. There would be no severance. In fact, we would claw back every single dollar from those fraudulent expense reports. My next call was to Marcus, our head of corporate security. Marcus was a former Secret Service agent who radiated a quiet, intimidating calm. I told him to be on standby on gala night. At 8:45 p.m. sharp, Logan's keycard, his email account, and all his system access credentials would be terminated remotely. He would be locked out of the company he was trying to sell. I then contacted our public relations lead and had her draft a short, neutral statement about an immediate leadership change. A statement that focused entirely on Nexara's unwavering commitment to its core values of integrity and respect. This was no longer just about stopping a bad deal. This was a corporate decapitation. As I coordinated the pieces of my plan, I realized I couldn't go home. Our penthouse, once my sanctuary, now felt like hostile territory. I packed a small overnight bag, leaving his suits hanging in the closet, his awards gathering dust on the shelves, and the entire life we had built together behind me. My pivot was now physical. I was leaving for good. The biggest truth of my life had just flipped on its head. I was never Logan's partner. I was his primary investor, and he was planning a hostile takeover. My mission wasn't to save a marriage, it was to protect an asset and the 140 families who depended on it for their livelihood. I checked into a suite at the Grand Regency, the very hotel that was hosting the gala. I needed to be on site, a queen moving her pieces into position on the board. From the window of my suite, I could see the distant, glittering lights of the Nexara headquarters. My headquarters, my cell phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Logan, the first of many calls. I looked at his smiling picture on the screen, the handsome, charming man I thought I knew, and pressed the red ignore button. A second later, a text message appeared. "Where are you? Everything okay?" The feigned concern was more insulting than an open confession. It was a calculated performance for an audience of one. My finger hovered over the screen, and then I made the irreversible choice. I blocked his number. It was a small, simple, digital action, but it had the finality of a slamming iron door. There was no going back. There was no path back to being the quiet wife who paid the bills and stayed out of the way. Alexandra Pierce, the freelancer, was gone for good. The founder of Nexara Dynamics was taking her place. In the suffocating quiet of the hotel suite, the personal cost of this war finally hit me. The life I thought I had, the one I had carefully curated and protected, was a complete fabrication. The memories were all tainted now, like photographs left out in the rain, the colors bleeding together into a meaningless blur. Our wedding photos on the wall, the trips to Italy, the private jokes we shared, they were no longer memories, they were evidence in the case against him. I had to accept that I was about to be publicly humiliated before I could ever be vindicated. The local gossip columns and tech blogs would have a field day. Tech mogul's husband cheats, Gala drama ensues. I would have to stand on a stage in front of hundreds of my peers and essentially announce the end of my marriage and the implosion of my leadership team in the same breath. My carefully guarded privacy, the shield my family had taught me to value above all else, was about to be shattered into a million pieces. I was raised to believe that a woman's power was in her discretion, in her ability to operate without drawing attention. I now had to accept that, for me, power required a public declaration. I was sacrificing my anonymity to save my company's soul. Looking at my reflection in the dark window of the suite, I saw that it was a price I was now willing to pay. The woman looking back at me was no longer a wife. She was a chief executive officer preparing for war. My goal was no longer just to stop the straightest mind deal. It had grown, sharpened, become something bigger. The new goal was to publicly and permanently re-establish the core values of Nexara Dynamics. I would make an example of Logan and Sabrina. Their names would become cautionary tales whispered in the boardrooms and bars of Silicon Valley, a story about what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you mistake silence for absence. I would personally save every single one of those 140 jobs, and I would step out from behind the curtain for good. I would take my rightful place as the leader of my company, not as a silent benefactor but as a visible, active founder. I picked up the phone and called Marjorie. "I need the entire board to meet me in the hotel lobby at 8 p.m. tomorrow night," I told her, my voice firm. "We're going to walk into that ballroom together as a united front." My risk was no longer just about losing the company. It was about defining what the company stands for. I wasn't just firing a rogue executive, I was performing a public exorcism, cleansing my creation of the poison that had been allowed to fester in the dark. Logan, unable to reach me, did what cornered, desperate men do. He retaliated. Since he couldn't find me to control me, he tried to control the narrative instead. He sent a company-wide email. The subject line was nauseatingly optimistic. "Exciting times ahead for Nexara." In the body of the email, he preemptively announced a paradigm-shifting strategic partnership that would be finalized in the days following the gala. He framed it as his vision, his victory, his grand plan for the future. He was trying to make the deal seem inevitable, to build so much momentum that the board would be afraid to oppose it. Worse, he specifically named Sabrina Vaughn as a key strategic consultant whose insights had been invaluable in forging this new path forward. He was publicly tying her reputation to the company's success, trying to legitimize her involvement. Daniel King forwarded me the email with a single grim line of text. "The rat is trying to burn the ship before we can take the helm." It was a decisive move on his part. He was forcing my hand, making a private matter public, but on his own deceptive terms. I had lost the element of complete surprise. Now I wasn't just dropping a bomb into a quiet room. I was trying to disarm one he had already planted and set to explode. I didn't expect my parents to be on my side. I knew they loved me, but their love came wrapped in the same old rules that had raised me. Discretion above drama, image above confession. When Logan, in a panic, called them to feed them his version of the story, I felt it like another betrayal, not just his, but theirs in that instant, because they let his version sit in their ears first. Mom called first. Her voice was small and thin like a teacup in a wind tunnel. Alexandra, what is going on? Logan said you're not yourself. You know how important appearances are. She sounded worried, but it was worry tuned into a cadence I recognized. Worry that started with, what will people think? She asked if I'd thought about taking the quiet route, if perhaps I could let the lawyers handle it and spare everyone the spectacle. Her concern wasn't for me. It was for the ripple that a public fight would send through the family name. Dad was worse. His voice was the sound of a problem that needed containing. Whatever this is, you need to handle it quietly, he said, blunt and flat. A public spectacle will reflect poorly on the family. There are ways to make this go away without a headline. I heard years of training in that sentence, training that had taught me to lower my head and tidy the mess so the rest of the household could sleep. They weren't my allies in the way I needed them to be. They were a force of containment, leaning on the same instincts that had taught me to hide. Their worry was for the wrong things. After I explained, briefly and without drama, that this was no private marital dispute but a direct threat to people's livelihoods, Mom shifted, hesitated, and then said, "We only want what's best for you." It was a small gesture, but it was watered down by the earlier caution. Hanging up, I felt two things at once. The old loneliness, sharpened by the knowledge that the people who had taught me to be invisible were now telling me to stay invisible, and a stone-deep clarity. If my family believed that avoiding the scene was the right move, then I would have to move through the world without their approval. That thought landed like a physical thing in my chest. My safe spaces were shrinking. Home, family, the private life I'd so carefully curated. The only real ground left to stand on was the company itself and the people who worked there. I'd been planning to protect them anyway. Now I felt the extra weight of doing it alone. Logan's preemptive email had done more than rile up the board. It had lit a candle in the hands of the rumor mill, and the wind picked it up fast. Within hours, a blogger with a decent following and a nose for heat had turned Logan's cheerful memo into copy. VP Logan Price hints at deal with straightest mind ahead of innovation honors. The headline had the exact bite Logan wanted. It suggested momentum, inevitability, excitement. The piece quoted an industry source praising the plan as a smart consolidation move. It didn't need to name names to do damage. The tone implied that the company was about to change hands, that our little scrappy startup was suddenly in play. That single post sprouted tendrils within the day, retweets, a short write-up on a larger site, then an email from a friend at a mainstream tech newsletter asking if the rumors were true. My phone started buzzing with questions from people I trusted and people I didn't. Employees messaged me with nervous questions. They'd heard the same gossip. Two of our senior engineers were polite, worried. A product manager asked if they should start preparing a hedge plan. The chatter inside the company that I'd kept steady for years began to vibrate with anxiety. What made it worse was the timing. The blur of publicity played directly into Logan's plan. If people thought the deal was real, the board might not have the stomach to resist. Momentum can make bad options look like the only ones. I could see it like a film. The award, the announcement, the applause, then a vote the next day with everyone convinced they were chasing a winning horse. The narrative was slipping from my grasp before I'd had a chance to shape it. Marjorie called late that afternoon, and the exhaustion in her voice was a drumbeat of worry. Two of the board members are wavering, she said without preamble. They've been nudged by the press and by direct calls from Logan. They think this partnership could accelerate growth and put us ahead of straightest mind. They don't see the fine print. Hearing her say the words waver felt like the floor shuddering. The board was my backstop. I had counted on them more than I'd realized. If I couldn't secure their loyalty, I couldn't execute the plan cleanly. Marjorie insisted that she'd keep her seat, but she needed me to give them a reason to trust my judgment in the next 12 hours. They're asking for assurances, she said. They want to meet you before the gala. They want to hear that we have considered everything. I told her I couldn't reveal my full hand. If I gave them the smoking gun, if I exposed Logan's emails and Sabrina's involvement too early, he could try countermeasures. He could spin the narrative harder, leak parts of the evidence, or accelerate paperwork. He was dangerous when cornered. Instead, I asked for a short conference call at 6 p.m., an hour before the event. "Tell them I'll be transparent tonight," I said, "but not before I can present it personally. Ask them for patience, enough to see the facts." My voice was steady because I had to be steady. I couldn't show the nervousness I felt inside. She agreed, though I heard the tension in her answer. "We'll do it," she said, and then, softer, "Be careful." I promised I would be. After I hung up, I set the conference call for 6, drafted a tight, composed message for the board explaining that I would address the issue publicly at the gala, and told Daniel to be ready with the financials in case I needed to show how dangerous the deal was. The constraint tightened like a noose. They wanted answers, the press wanted a story, Logan was accelerating his plan, and I had to convince a handful of people to wait and trust me without seeing the full picture. Then Oliver forwarded me something that tilted my stomach into my throat. The subject line was clinical, draft, potential legal filing. I didn't need to open it to know what it might be. In the body of his message was an attachment and a brief note. "This was sent to me anonymously by a source close to Sabrina. It's not filed yet, but it's ready to go. Read carefully." I opened the document with fingers that felt numb. It was a draft harassment complaint, written in formal language but carrying a poison beneath it. Sabrina's legal team had apparently prepared a narrative that framed every professional inquiry I'd made, every time I'd asked for access logs, questioned meetings, or pushed for transparency, as a pattern of obsessive, aggressive behavior. The draft laid out a timeline of alleged incidents, described routine emails as harassing, and painted my requests for information as stalking. It suggested that I had created a hostile environment for her as a consultant. There were carefully crafted phrases designed to play to sympathetic ears: jealous spouse, obsessive behavior, escalating conduct. The filing was dated for submission the day after the gala. It felt like a cold, well-planned move. If they filed this right after I terminated them, the story would immediately flip. The headline would be less about corporate theft and more about my supposed instability. People would ask, did she act impulsively? Was she motivated by jealousy? The smear would breathe for weeks, and in that breath they could drown the truth. This wasn't just a threat to the company anymore, it was a threat to my personhood, to my credibility. If the public narrative turned to my mental state, nobody would be listening to the emails, the expense reports, or the fine print in the straightest mind proposal. I stared at the words on the screen until my eyes burned. My first instinct was to call someone and explode, but that would play right into their hands. The smart move would have been to fire them quietly, hand them a package, and let the lawyers take it from there. But the filing made clear that any private termination would be reframed as evidence of the very narrative they were preparing. They'd leak the draft to the press before the courts could intervene. Every quiet office move I'd ever made would be reinterpreted as proof of obsession. They weren't just trying to profit from our technology, they were trying to manufacture a scandal that would stick. That realization took the last safe option off the table. The clean, professional termination that I'd imagined, a meeting in an HR office, a short statement, and legal follow-up, wasn't possible anymore. Sabrina had weaponized the legal system as a preemptive smear. If I fired them behind closed doors, their complaint would be positioned as a defensive act, and the court of public opinion would likely take their side at least long enough to freeze my options. The only way to stop that narrative from taking hold was to meet it head-on in public with witnesses, with the full force of the board behind me. I had to show everyone at once the reason for the termination and the evidence that supported it, so the story would be about betrayal and breach, not about a jealous wife losing her temper. The gala stage had turned from a nice place to reveal a leadership change into the only place I could safely do it. It was terrifying to accept. It meant exposing my private life to strangers, letting the world watch while I cut away parts of myself that I'd once mistaken for protection. But it also gave me something I hadn't counted on: control of the frame. If I spoke from the stage with the board beside me and the evidence ready, then their complaint would be seen for what it was: an attempted dodge, a distraction, a lie meant to muddy the waters. There was no easy path left. There was only the stage, the truth, and the choice to step into the light. I'm on the pre-gala conference call with the board, and even over the simple sizzle of a hotel line, I can hear the doubt in their voices. They ask practical questions, the kind that sound like concern but are really fishing for reasons to step away. Arthur Vance, a man who built his reputation on cautious decisions, speaks up first. Alexandra, Logan's projections on the Straightest Mind deal are very aggressive. If they're even half right, it's a game changer. His words land like stones dropped into a still pond. I know Logan has been whispering doctored numbers into ears, making the deal look like the only path forward. He's built a story piece by piece, and he's feeding it to people who want something to believe. While I've been planning, he's been actively undermining me. He's slid polished slides under board members' doors, he's toasted glasses with investors, he's made himself the bold, public face of a future he intends to loot. The ticking clock isn't just the board vote anymore, it's the loyalty of my own leadership. If they switch sides, everything collapses. I feel a squeeze in my chest, an immediate clarity that I can't afford any more half-truths. I take a breath and speak slowly because panic would be contagious. There are factors regarding Mr. Price's proposal that represent a material threat to this company's survival, I tell them. No technical language, no financial speak, just plain and serious. I will be addressing them tonight. I need you to trust me until then. It's a gamble. I'm asking for blind faith at a time when they're being offered what looks like a golden ticket. There's a pause, the board's collective intake of breath. Marjorie's voice comes back steady, experienced. We'll hold for tonight, she says. It's not a promise of blind loyalty, it's a fragile truce. I hang up with my hands slightly shaking, acutely aware that I've bought us a few hours. That's all the time I need to finish the plan, to make the staging perfect, to ensure the evidence is undeniable and the narrative impossible to twist. The clock is louder than ever. Every second from now could be a life raft or a misstep. I turn my attention to the final pieces, knowing there's no turning back. After the call, I go through the motion of making things feel normal because panic tastes like metal in my mouth. I text Gia Morales, short and direct. I have an opening at Nexara I want to talk about. Are you at the Innovation Honors tonight? I watch the dots appear and disappear on the screen, my breath caught, until she replies she has a ticket. Relief is a small, private thing. It's not the same as victory, but it's a piece of the future I want to build. I lay out the midnight blue gown on the bed and run my fingers over the silk. It feels like armor when I think about it that way, smooth, strong, impossible to stain. I rehearse the speech in my head not because I'm vain, but because every word needs to be precise. The speech is short and direct. No room for melodrama, no room for interpretation, just truth and the things it will expose. I fold the printed harassment draft into my clutch and smooth it flat, feeling the paper's weight like a promise to myself that I won't flinch. I check Marcus's reports one last time, confirm the remote lockout schedule for 8:45 p.m., and make sure Daniel has the financials queued to back up anything I say. I go through the list in my head like a surgeon double-checking instruments. The board will stand with me. The security team will act at the appointed moment. PR will release a short statement that focuses on values, not on gossip. But none of those are the real armor. The real armor is the speech, my voice, the evidence in my hands, and the board standing beside me. I feel isolated in a way that's almost physical. My family doubts me, some of my board members are nervous, and my enemies have already started a smear campaign. My plan is set, sealed, and dangerous. There is no margin for error. I breathe deep, straighten my shoulders, and fold into the dress. The last thing left is my voice and the choice to use it. I tuck the printed complaint into my clutch one more time, its edges a constant reminder of how low they're willing to go. I don't tell myself it won't hurt, I only tell myself I'll make the hurt matter. Standing in the hotel suite, dressed and ready, a wave of doubt washes over me so heavy it feels like rain. I look in the full-length mirror and see a stranger wearing a familiar face. For years, I chose to be invisible on purpose. I thought that silence was strength, that being unseen kept me safe and smart. Now, looking into the glass, I can't help but see where that choice has cost me. My silence wasn't always a strategy, sometimes it was an abdication. I handed him the microphone and the applause because I was taught that a woman should be quiet about success. It sinks in me like a slow burn. I let Logan become the face of my work, my ideas, my success. I gave him credit in small, easy ways until one day he owned the whole story. He used what I had built as scenery for his performance. My parents' lessons, mom's careful manners, dad's insistence on privacy had shaped me into someone who preferred to fund from the shadows. Those lessons carried weight and comfort, but they also left me ill-prepared for a man who would weaponize my discretion. I catch myself asking the sharpest question of all: was Dad right? Should I have stayed behind the scenes? Should I have managed assets quietly and let the men take the stage? The question sits with me, heavy and absurd. The truth is, staying invisible made it easier for a man like Logan to rewrite the story. He didn't just outmaneuver a founder, he played on the insecurities the family had taught me to carry. The goal in my head feels impossible. How can I undo years of self-effacement in one 3-minute speech under bright lights and cameras? I touch the glass and see not just my reflection but all the small choices that brought me here. Every time I bit my tongue, every time I let a compliment about my husband stand in for praise about my work. The doubt is real. It's cold and immediate, but beneath it there is a quieter, harder truth. Those lessons didn't make me weak, they made me careful. And now care will be my weapon. I steady myself, breathe, and remind myself that what I'm about to do is not a moment of vanity. It's a reclamation. I have no illusions that it will be easy or that my voice won't shake. But I also know that the sound of my voice is the only thing that will cut through the noise Logan has built. My isolation feels like an ache as I sit on the edge of the bed and scroll through old photos. There we are in Italy, me in the background, Logan holding a gelato like it's a trophy. There's an image of a company picnic where I'm the one with my arm around the grill, smiling, while everyone's cameras are on him as he explains something about partnerships. Even the happy pictures are stained by the memory that I took many of them. I was the one behind the lens as much as behind the code. I was a ghost in my own life, always on the edges of the frame. He didn't just sideline me. He took the space I willingly ceded because I thought it was noble to be unseen. I think about the 140 employees who sleep under the weight of a mortgage and a family dinner schedule. They don't know my name. They don't know there's a woman who signed their paychecks, who stayed up for nights debugging code, someone who cares whether they have work tomorrow. How can these hands-on, brilliant people trust a founder they've never met? My worst fear is getting up on that stage and having my voice betray me. What if it shakes? What if they see me as the image Logan and Sabrina are building, the jealous, unhinged wife? The harassing complaint sits like a threat in my bag, ready to be used as a story about my supposed instability. The belief that my work would speak for itself has been shattered. My work needs a face, and I have to be that face. The thought of standing alone in front of the room feels like stepping onto a ledge. Still, another thought comes in like a small, steady light. I think about the code I wrote late at night, the small, clean functions that turned into a platform people relied on. I think about Gia Morales, the candidate Logan refused because she would make him feel small. I think about the joy of building something from nothing, the tiny triumphs that had nothing to do with applause. Those memories are proof that what I did was real. They are the quiet fuel that keeps me going when my hands tremble. I almost call it off that night. I imagine myself slipping back into the shadows, letting the lawyers handle the mess, letting the ugly fallout happen quietly. It would be easier, and I picture Mom's disappointed look and Dad's quiet, practical advice about keeping things tidy. But then I picture Gia again. I see her at a tiny startup office carrying a mentor's promise like a torch. I remember the fire in her eyes when she talked about building tools that actually help people. She's one of the people Logan tried to weed out because her talent made him uncomfortable. The truth is, my strength isn't in the gown or the title. It's in the fact that I built this company, signed the checks, and wrote the lines of code that turned into products people trust. He built his power on a lie, on a constructed image and a misdirection, and I enabled it by not stepping forward. My only way out is to tell the truth, no matter the cost. The idea of being seen terrifies me, but hiding has already cost me too much. My resolve hardens like steel tempered by heat. It's not a roar, it's a quiet, certain clarity that comes from the knowledge of who I am and what I created. I am not the woman he married in the glossy photo. I am the woman who owns his company. Tonight the world will finally meet her. I fold the speech one last time, tuck it into my clutch, and stand. The dress is my armor, the speech is my sword, and the truth is the only thing that can cut through the lies. We met in the hotel lobby like a small, nervous army. The board looked thinner in person than on paper, ties looser, shoes more scuffed, people who had built reputations on careful moves suddenly walking into a room where a single misstep could cost everything. I felt none of their nerves. I felt a clear, cold focus, the kind that comes when you can see exactly what has to be done. We moved as one toward the ballroom. The doors opened and the room hit me like heat. Chandeliers hung like small cities over a sea of suits and silk. Conversations folded and refolded like origami. The scent of perfume and expensive cologne was thick in the air, everybody trying to smell like success. I walked with Marjorie at my side, her hand a small, steadying pressure on my arm. That touch meant more than any pep talk. It told me I was not walking into this alone. I spotted table 6 long before we reached it. Logan was animated, the kind of showman who talks with his hands and expects the world to clap. Sabrina sat beside him, smiling the practiced smile of someone who knew how to look like she belonged. They didn't notice me at first. I watched their faces change when they did. Logan's grin faltered, then tightened, then slid into a look I knew well, 1 part confusion, 2 parts anger. He started up from his chair as if to intercept me, to put on a scene where he was the wronged hero. Marjorie guided me past without a pause, and the room shifted. Heads turned like a slow wave. We took our seats at the head table. People whispered. A few phones lifted, cameras clicked. I could feel the balance of the room tilt slightly in my direction. It was subtle, like a breeze shifting a curtain, but it was real. Logan was left standing, exposed in the center of his small kingdom. I did not look at him. I didn't need to. I had no wish to feed his ego with my attention. My job was the room, the company, the people who had built Nexara Dynamics with blood and long nights and fierce pride. The ceremony went on with the practiced, safe cadence of awards shows, light, applause, a joke about the valley. I kept my heartbeat slow, a metronome beneath the pomp. Then the moment came. The announcer's voice filled the hall, bright and practiced. And the winner for innovation in enterprise technology is Nexara Dynamics. Applause rose, the kind that fills a room and makes a person feel small and large all at once. Logan rose like a man who'd practiced a million triumphs. He kissed Sabrina on the cheek, the move staged and confident, and began to walk toward the stage. Then the host hesitated, checked a note, looked up with a polite, puzzled smile, and said something that knocked the floor out from under him. Accepting the award, please welcome the founder and principal shareholder of Nexara Dynamics, Alexandra Pierce. The room inhaled. There was a ripple that felt like a sound. Logan froze halfway down the aisle like a dog who'd suddenly remembered it wasn't supposed to sit on the couch. Cameras pivoted. Conversations stopped. I stood and walked to the stage as quietly as if I were taking a book from a shelf. When I passed table 6, Logan's face was a white, taut thing. Sabrina's smile had vanished. For the first time in years, I was not the woman on the edge of the picture. I was in the frame. The award was heavy and real in my hands, glass, precise, the kind of object you can hold and measure the miles it took to get there. I stepped up to the microphone and let the sound of the room settle behind me. I could hear my own breath even through the speakers, and it felt right to let it be steady. "Thank you," I said. My voice carried. It wasn't loud, it was clear. "I am Alexandra Pierce, and I built Nexara Dynamics from the ground up." There it was, the sentence I'd rehearsed until it felt like bone. You could hear the word built in the room. People leaned toward builders. Faces shifted. A gasp went through some tables, a low murmur through others. "I am proud of what this team has accomplished," I continued. "We built this company on two things: innovation and integrity. Those aren't slogans, they're promises." I paused and let the words land. The chandeliers had a way of throwing light into eyes, and I saw a dozen faces go still, listening like they were hearing something they had not expected but needed. "It has become clear that some in our leadership have failed to uphold those promises," I said. I let my gaze find table 6. Logan's jaw worked. Sabrina's fingers tightened on a napkin. "There has been unauthorized sharing of confidential company information and a deliberate attempt to undermine the company's charter for personal gain." The room narrowed to that sentence for a sweet, terrifying second. I saw people checking phones, heads turning toward colleagues, the ripple turning into a hum. I didn't let myself be swept by the drama. I stated the facts because facts are hard to spin into gossip. "In light of that, and in the interest of protecting our team, effective immediately, there is a leadership change." I kept my voice even. "Logan Price is no longer affiliated with Nexara Dynamics." Saying his name aloud was a small, private satisfaction. "Furthermore, we are severing ties with any consultants who have breached our trust. Sabrina Vaughn, your engagement is terminated." I didn't raise my voice, there was no need. The statement landed and the room wrapped itself around the moment. 2 security men, calm and professional, rose from their chairs like they had rehearsed the move. Marcus, our head of security, came out from the side of the room. He spoke to Logan and Sabrina in low tones, businesslike and efficient. They rose, stunned, public humiliation forming like frost around them. No one shouted, no one made a scene. It was efficient and final, the kind of ending that leaves people staring, trying to make sense of the sudden quiet. As they were guided toward the exit, I watched the cameras pivot and the whispers spread. People leaned forward in their seats, some in shock, others in a kind of relieved curiosity. The moment felt surgical, precise, ugly, necessary. I had planned for clean actions, clean words. I had refused theatrics because theatrics give the liar room to rewrite the script. I finished with the one thing that mattered. "Nexara Dynamics will continue," I said. "We will be led with the integrity that built this company." "Thank you." The applause began, small at first, then growing. It was not the wild celebration of a staged victory. It was the sound of people who felt seen and protected. I stepped off the stage not as a woman broken, but as someone who had just cut away the rot. The walk back to the head table felt longer than it should have. Every step was watched, dissected, preserved on someone's phone. I saw faces I knew, engineers who had stayed late fixing bugs, support staff who took angry calls at 3 in the morning, standing and clapping in a way that wasn't just polite. It was relief. It was gratitude. The days after were a blur, but in a very different way than any day before. The office filled with people who wanted to talk, to shake a hand, to say the simplest of things, "Thank you." We held an all-hands meeting in the main hall, and for the first time I stood before the team as their founder and their leader. I told them what happened, the plain facts stripped of gossip. I told them the proposed deal with StratusMind had been stopped and that the layoffs had been prevented. You could see the relief wash through the room. It was the kind of relief that makes people breathe out loud. A man in support who'd kept his kids' college fund in a spreadsheet I had once helped review called it a miracle. An engineer who'd worked on a small but crucial algorithm said he felt like he'd finally been defending something that belonged to someone who cared. They didn't all know my name then, but they knew what I had done for them. The press did what the press does. Stories ran with different slants, some focused on the drama, some on leadership, some on the fallout. Our public relations team stayed on message, a founder stepping in to protect her company. It was the truth, and in a way that mattered more than any headline, employees began to tell their neighbors and friends that the company was safe. Logan called 52 times. I never picked up. I blocked his number and let the calls go to a dead, polite silence. He sent messages, then emails, then messages through mutual friends. None of it moved me. The prenup meant he kept the car and his suits. That was the extent of it. It felt absurd and almost small compared to everything else he'd tried to do. Sabrina's consulting leads dried up like a pond in drought. A few of her former contacts apologized and then quietly unlisted her from their directories. Word moves fast in our world when a consultant is shown to have mixed romance and confidential information. Panels she was scheduled to speak on were canceled. Introductions dried up. Inside Nexara Dynamics, the new equilibrium formed slowly and then with surprising speed. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed the work of being visible. The all-hands meeting turned into a planning session. Teams realigned, not from panic but from purpose. People wanted to stay because they trusted that someone at the top would fight for them. They wanted to do the work because it mattered and because they could see it mattered to someone they respected. There was a practical side to it too. We tightened processes, reviewed systems, and set clearer rules about who could see what and when. That wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Daniel worked through the financials, ensuring there was no lingering damage. Oliver and our legal team closed the loop on the breaches Logan had opened. Marcus and his team reviewed security access and tightened down anything that could be used again as a backdoor. And finally, there was the quiet bit of rebuilding my personal life. Calls from Mom and Dad came, awkward at first. They'd read the headlines, seen the pictures of me on the stage, and their voices were a mix of pride and the old instinct to smooth things over. They apologized in the small, stiff ways parents often do, and the gap between us felt different now, wider in some places, cleaner in others. The penthouse felt different when I went back. The Tom Ford cologne bottle went in the trash. I learned that privacy can be a refuge or a prison depending on how you use it. Through it all, I kept going into the office. I took meetings and I listened. I answered questions I had once let others answer. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work to rebuild trust. The company moved forward because the people inside it moved with purpose. The new equilibrium wasn't peace. It was the hard, living work of making sure that what we had built would survive, and that felt, curiously, like home. The cost was real and it landed harder than I thought it would. My marriage was over in a way that felt both sudden and inevitable. For days my phone was a metronome of notifications, texts, voicemails, people wanting quotes, people wanting to know what had happened. The gossip sites had a field day. Headlines called it drama, betrayal, a tech saga. I tried not to read much, but of course I did. Humans are curious, we are drawn to collapses. Mom called first, voice small and apologetic. Dad followed with a stiff, practical tone that tried to make sense of things the only way he knew how, by minimizing the spectacle. They both said they were sorry for not trusting me sooner, but the initial doubt had left a mark that didn't fade with an apology. Their hesitation was one more cut, one more thing to rebuild. Walking through the penthouse after it all, it felt different, empty in a way that wasn't peaceful. Logan's suits were still hung in the closet, but the weight of them was gone. I tossed the Tom Ford bottle in the trash and felt a tiny, private triumph that made me laugh and cry at once. Little rituals like that mattered. They were the small closures that held larger changes together. There's grief in public humiliation. I felt it, the private life exposed, the photos, the stories, but there was also a clearing that happened when the dust settled. The privacy I'd guarded for years had been a kind of cage. It had kept me safe and it had kept me small. Losing it hurt, but the loss also opened a door. I had to rebuild my idea of trust and partnership from scratch. That work was lonely and messy, but it was honest. The pain felt like a cleansing fire burning away brittle things that had held me back. I would have traded none of it to keep my old life. The vulnerability that comes with being seen is terrifying, yes, but it is also liberating. I discovered that being visible doesn't make you weak, it makes you accountable. And accountability, as terrifying as it can be, is a kind of power. 2 weeks later, I made another public move that felt like a statement about who I wanted to be. I announced the Nexara Mentorship Fund, $10 million of my own money dedicated to supporting women in engineering. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a promise. I wanted to build doors where Logan had closed them. My first official act was to call Gia Morales. I remember her voice on the phone, catching and bright, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I offered her not just an analyst role, but a spot on a new internal research and development team with a direct line to me. I wanted talent, hunger, and the kind of blunt intelligence Logan found uncomfortable. Gia accepted with a quiet, fierce thank you that made the whole thing feel worth it. The fund changed how people saw us. It shifted conversations inside the company and out in the world. Women in our engineering group started showing up to meetings with new confidence. Candidates I'd once been told were not a culture fit began to get second looks. That was the point, to change the culture so the next generation had fewer barriers and more mentors. That was the best revenge, if you can call it that, turning a toxic moment into structural change. I still live in the penthouse looking out at the bay, but the view isn't just a backdrop for someone else's story anymore. It is my witness. I do interviews now, sitting in the living room with the city behind me, telling the truth in plain sentences because that's what people deserve. A journalist once asked, "What's next for Nexara Dynamics?" I leaned forward, let the light catch my face, and said simply, "I'm just getting started. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below about being seen, about fighting to be heard. Subscribe for more stories like this, and if you liked this one, leave a like. I'll see you in the next video.